Hey everyone, George here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to another episode of our ongoing webinar series, Growing Forward. As many of you know, Growing Forward was specifically created for our grower audience, and we've got a really good session for you today. It's titled Farming on Autopilot, What AI Means for the Vineyard. We've got Graham Buxa, who is the head of marketing, interviewing Arthur Chen, who is the CEO and co-founder of Verdi. We're going to hear a little bit from Arthur on some of the applications AI is having right now and the impact it's having on efficiencies and quality, which I think is really interesting. But for me, what was even more interesting was, hearing Arthur's thoughts on what we can expect in the future with regard to AI and its impact in the vineyard. Now, as a reminder, we always pre-record these sessions, but Arthur and Graham are going to be watching the broadcast right along with you. They're going to be monitoring the chat room. So as you have questions, just pop them into the chat and Arthur and or Graham will pick them off as they come in. And one final thing before I hand it off to Graham, we could not produce content like this on a regular basis and deliver it to you for free without the support of our sponsors. So I want to begin with thanking our presenting series sponsor, and that's Verdi. They are a great partner, an awesome company. We worked with them for a number of years. And our series supporting sponsors as well. We've got Beagle Tech and Bloor Carl Immigration Group, a couple great companies that we worked with for a number of years. Thank you guys for all of your support. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoy the session. Graham, why don't you take it away?
Hi everyone, my name is Roman Kozak, CTO and founder of Verdi. We make it easy to implement and manage a variable rate strategy for your vineyard. Our technology can break up your existing irrigation zones into as many subzones as is needed to match the variability of your field, whether that's based on soil type, terrain, or interplanting. Then we can direct more water to the areas that need it and restrict water to the areas that don't need it as much. So if you have vineyard blocks that look like the one above, we can help you make them look like the one below. And there are a lot of benefits to doing this, such as increased revenue per acre due to quality improvements, a restriction in water usage, as well as a single harvest pass. Verdi also engineers the most affordable irrigation automation solution for vineyards. The Verdi block controller installs in minutes and brings your existing valves, pumps, and sensors online for automation, monitoring, remote control, and alerts. Everything is simple to use from your desktop or your mobile phone. So if you would like to learn more, we would love to chat, so please reach out and we'll see you in the field soon.
Great, thanks George. My name is Graham Buxa. I'm the head of marketing at Verdi, and I'm here with Arthur Chen, CEO of Verdi, to talk about irrigation automation.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks to the Win team for having me here. Really excited to talk about our topic today on AI in the vineyard with everyone here at the event. Little background on myself. So I'm Arthur, of course, co-founder and CEO at Verdi, and really our focus at Verdi is to make irrigation automation easy and affordable for growers. In terms of where I come from, I'm from a farming family originally, and also an engineer by training. I've spent the past 6 years specifically in precision agriculture as well, working alongside growers in the field to build tools that actually help them with their work. That's included research as well with Google, for example, really looking at the intersection of AI and farming. A little bit about Verdi. We're making irrigation automation easy and affordable for growers once again, and we have a patented wireless smart device that can basically plug into existing irrigation systems to automate them. So we can turn a grower's existing valves into smart valves, pumps into smart pumps. We can even go down to individual drip lines, for example, to help manage variability and check for leaks and breaks. But most importantly here, we've really developed our technology to be 10 times less expensive than traditional automation solutions, really focused on helping growers to get a strong ROI from automation. So today we're operating on over 14,000 acres of farmland all across California, as well as the Pacific Northwest. And we're really looking forward to sharing more of our thoughts, having worked in the field with growers and knowing a lot of other tools and technologies in the industry as well to share our thoughts on AI.
So hopefully what we can do is just, I have a bunch of questions set up here. I guess what is sort of forefront in my mind is, how is it going to affect jobs labor, all of the core things that are everyday issues right now. There's this big promise about what AI will do, but no one's really said what that is going to do for people growing grapes, people on vineyards. So I hope I can just ask you a few honest questions and get your answers for those. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so I think, right now, no one's using AI on the vineyard, or it seems that way. It seems like AI is really just ChatGPT, or it's in your Google account. Why isn't AI an everyday occurrence on the vineyard, and how's that going to change?
Yeah, yeah. When we look at AI on the vineyard, right, it really is somewhat of a buzzword right now that you hear companies throw around, that you hear pop up in research as well. And it is exciting, certainly. Growers on the ground are quite excited about what new technologies can mean for the vineyard. But new technologies have been pitched to vineyards and to farms in general for quite some time as well. So the real question is, how can new tools like AI actually help and support growers in their everyday operations? And how can new tools actually allow them to gain an ROI and not just be a shiny new tool? So I think that's always top of mind for growers. Now, when we dive into that a little further, especially when we look at tools like automation, for example, these are tools and concepts that have been around for quite some time, for possibly even decades as well. But at the end of the day, right, about 95% of growers, for example, don't use automation today and prefer to do things manually because automation, frankly, is expensive. It's quite complicated for our everyday workers to use and to maintain. And it also tends to come in the form of point solutions that can only do specific tasks on a farm. Whereas, the complexity of farming is a lot more than just, single tasks of turning a valve on and off or doing something else on a farm. So, growers are really looking for tools that can help with that entire process and also be, affordable enough and easy enough to use that it's actually scalable on a farm.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, there's been a lot of tools out there for a long time that help farmers do things, but not a lot of tools that help them make decisions because there's just so much information to process. AI is going to help us make those decisions. Is that sort of about right? And then, having that follow through, that's also, we're just at the right time in the world, I guess, that technology is finally sort of like accessible for its use and affordable for everyone to use. So you sort of get both sides of it. You get data that you could do something with, or AI can do something with, and then you have that follow through where you actually don't have to, you don't have an AI overlord.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think that's one way to look at it. And I think more specifically, you do hear about, some people talk about how, there's going to be, farmers, there's going to be AI turning into farmers as well, helping farmers to farm, in some cases, helping them to make a lot of their decisions. But when we say, helping farmers to make decisions, I think what's important there is that it's really a support tool. It's not there to replace a grower's intuition or a grower's ability to actually be in the field and see what's happening. Quite often when you're looking at these decisions that are being made in farming. If we take irrigation, for example, there's so many different variables and factors that need to be taken into account. It's not just what you're seeing right now in the field, for example. It's not just soil moisture, not just evapotranspiration and all these other factors, but it's also things like, what quality tier of grape are you trying to produce? What's the history and the terroir of this entire vineyard, for example, as well. And those are things that are a lot more difficult for AI to be able to understand. But essentially what the AI can do from a decision-making standpoint is to help growers to process and understand, the data and information that's coming off of their vineyard so that the growers have, a clearer set of information to make decisions from. And that's really where we see AI and other tools actually coming into play within the vineyard and helping growers to make decisions in this way.
How do they do it now? Like if you're talking about all these sort of like information about the soil, information about maybe the vines themselves, what type of planting you have, the weather. These are potentially huge data sets and very specific. how would people use that data now? Like what the alternative for this? Like as opposed to having, that data be processed for us, which I think sounds dreamy because I hate spreadsheets, but who's doing that work right now?
Yeah, yeah. So it does come in stages here. So I think the most fundamental stage is the grower's intuition and the grower's experience of having worked in a field before. And really key to this is growers scout in a vineyard, right? And you'll often hear growers talk about how important it is to be in the vineyard to actually understand what's there and how things are growing. So that includes things like being able to be in front of the vines and look at their condition directly, right? Being able to feel the leaves yourself, taking a shovel and taking a chunk out of the ground to actually feel the moisture in the soil. And that's a very traditional way, of course, of farming, but it does work, and it is how growers have been able to produce really high quality wines for that everyday people are consuming, right? And that's the immediate level, and that's really where now we're also seeing growers start to look at how they can leverage new tools, for example, like sensors in the ground or on the field to better understand and have a bit more visibility into what's actually happening in the field. Right now, although sensors have gained a lot of popularity in the past decades, we're still seeing that overall. We're not seeing every grower use sensors yet, right? And that's also because the ROI isn't necessarily always there, even though it's getting better over time. But that's where, now instead of using the shovel method to understand soil moisture, for example, growers can have a sensor, for example, in the ground that's monitoring soil moisture at a continuously, so that they can get a constant stream of data coming in from the vineyard to understand what's happening. Now, of course, that's focused a lot on moisture and irrigation, but there's so many other types of data that growers can really collect from that as well. Evapotranspiration, they can look at things like heat and temperature as well. So there's a wealth of different data sources that can come from the vineyard, but there's so many different variables as well that can impact that, and that can impact the final product of the wine grapes as well. So that's sort of what we see right now, and I think what's interesting there is growers are always looking for new ways to really better understand what's happening in the vineyard. And so these new tools are making it into the field. And I think there's a lot of, trial and error and, testing that's happening right now there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, this really reminds me of the conversation I had last week with the CEO of Precip, .ai, who has, the most accurate weather data you can get, and also historical weather data. Like you can look back in time. And so there's this rich data set. And what you were talking about, growers right now, and for a long time have been going out to the field, feeling the soil, looking at the leaves, seeing what is happening at this point in time. And some of the tools we have, sensors and such, they give you that same data. You just don't have to go to the field. Mm-hmm. But there's sort of like, once you look at that over time, you start to get a new dimension of how can we do, not just reactive growing, how can we not just like respond to what's happening out there right now, but how can we look at that and say, oh, well, for the last few years, this has been happening. And what would that mean for future decisions? So I think that's just really interesting in terms of like what, how does data become a tool? And then the second question from that is, how do you process it? And I guess the answer is AI. That being said, if we're going to be going out to the fields, how do you think AI will affect jobs within the vineyard or growing in general?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think first of all, growers will always still need to go to the field, right? And they always will see a need to be able to actually understand, ground truth themselves, what's happening out there. But I think what the key difference there is, like right now, growers sometimes have to be in the field more often than they feel they need to be, for example, right? If you're out in the field checking for, one little thing, and that's spending a lot of time, just driving and then being in the field as well. So the idea there is really, AI is not going to, completely eliminate you going to the field, nor is it going to eliminate your workers going to the field. But it's really going to help you not have to be everywhere all at once, which is sort of, what it feels like right now, a lot of the time, where there's so many things going on in the field. There's so much work to do that, quite often it's hard to fit all of that within a single day. And the idea is this can help relieve some of that burden for the grower. to help them, for example, get data that they would otherwise have to show up in person to get, with a manual measurement, say with a pressure bomb, for example, they can now do that remotely, get a lot more data points as well over time, as you mentioned. And likewise, not just for, agronomic decisions, but same thing with like their machines, for example, being able to understand, the condition of their machines, whether something's going to break down soon, whether something needs repair, and so on. So in terms of, how this can affect jobs in the field, I think what's important here is that AI is really, again, a tool. It's not used to, it's used as a tool for growers to collaborate with. And I think when we look at, for example, other industries, like, for example, software development, where, there's a lot of talk about how coding agents or coding AI basically is going to take away jobs. But, when researchers have actually dove into it, and when you talk to a lot of the big tech companies, you'll find that actually, these agents are very, flashy on the surface, right? And it seems like they can do a lot, but when you dig into it, they're writing code, but they're not writing code of the right level of quality that these companies need, right? And so there was this big influx of initial adoption, but now people are realizing that, hey, it's really useful to make your developers more productive, but it's not useful enough to actually replace the developers themselves, because there's still so much institutional knowledge as well as tribal knowledge and intuition that people have, right? And the same goes for farming as well, where ultimately this is a tool that's going to help the grower and the workers in the field as well to better understand what's happening, to also better utilize other types of technologies in the field that traditionally maybe have been a little too complex to use on a regular basis. AI is a tool that can help make those tools also a lot more parsable, a lot easier to start using as well. So that's something that I personally find really exciting about what AI can do, not by replacing workers directly, but really by making them a lot more effective and being able to do a lot more on the farm. Now, there's always an argument to be made that, hey, maybe one day, a grower could choose that they really just want to rely on AI. And that's, their choice, right? That's totally up to them. And it makes sense, right? But I think, first of all, we're not at that point yet where the tools are good enough for that. And also, I think what we're going to see instead is that growers are going to choose to adopt AI and have their workers trained on it, but keep their labor forces, because their labor is so scarce and hard to come by. And it's more important to make your existing labor force, a lot more effective than necessarily just entirely replacing.
Yeah, I hear that. Do you have any examples of something that's like on the farm right now that's just too complex to use? There's a tool out there, no one knows how to use it, and AI will make that easier?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great examples out there. I'll mention two. So, one example is that right now, there's new tools out there that new products, for example, where you can put cameras onto an ATV, for example, or a tractor. And as those vehicles drive through the vineyard, they're basically taking pictures of the vineyard for you. But, if you're only taking pictures, for example, if you just put a video camera onto a vehicle, right, you're going to get tons of video, right? Hours and hours of video, but it's going to be very hard to actually go through and, pinpoint what exactly are the issues you're looking for, what kinds of patterns are you trying to detect as well, right? And that's where AI comes in, right? You've got, terabytes of data and maybe even petabytes one day, and you're trying to really, process that into a form that's actually usable by a grower. So that could mean, for example, doing bud counts, or maybe being able to detect disease in a vineyard as well, right? Those are all things that a human can do, but would just be so time consuming for them to do. And therefore, we don't see growers wanting to just put a regular camera onto a vehicle to collect data that way. So that's really where AI comes in to help with that, right? And likewise for, other areas as well, like irrigation, for example, for pruning and, so on.
Okay. We've kind of talked about maybe, existing models aren't quite ready. Like you gave the example of programmers, and the excitement is, hey, all programmers are going to be out of work. AI is so good. We don't need them anymore. We just need some guys with big ideas and the world's going to change. When do you think this is, with that in context and knowing that there's this like huge amount of, lived experience on the vineyard, when do you think this is going to happen? Like when will the data come together and we will be free from making decisions. Or, someone will give us sort of just the core answers we need to make those decisions.
Yeah, I think that's going to take a lot of time because right now, right, with AI models, for one, we know that they can hallucinate, they can give us the wrong answers and believe that they're correct. That's a general problem for all types of AI right now that needs to be solved. But it's not even, that extreme sometimes. It's just, there's information, there's only so much data and information sometimes that AI has access to that, is not the same as the amount of information that a human, could be able to see, right? Being able to use the five senses, be in a vineyard, and actually rely on intuition and these and experience to make decisions. So I think we're still very far from that being able to happen. And I think even when there comes a day perhaps that we get artificial general intelligence, which is to say that AGI, a word you may have heard before, that AI can basically do most of the same thinking as humans. I think farming is still a very special industry where because we're dealing with the physical world, because we are, growing, actual plants in the field, that there's a lot of work that not just, it doesn't just happen in our minds. It's not just decision making or just looking at data. It's really about, what you're doing in the physical world itself to, make plants grow better, to, deliver the highest yield and or quality. I think that's something that AI, even if, omnipotent, is going to have a very hard time to do because ultimately AI is something that lives, in software, right? So it can be a very useful tool for the growers, right? Being able to interface between the, software and the physical world. But it's going to be something where, I think AI on its own is not going to be able to fully do all these tasks in the field.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You have to, especially with the example of programming and having a skilled programmer review the quality of the work. Someone might say, "Hey, that was a good response. That was a bad response," and that series of good and bad will sort of train the model. Like that will give more feedback to do it. But for growers, I think if they started using it and it started providing some suggestions, you would also have to train it. You'd have to say, hey, you'd have to be, you'd have to give it those right and wrong answers. And that would have to start to happen at scale. And to say, hey, that was good information, that was bad information. And then over time, but sometimes I guess, within a growing season, you might get to say, hey, that was a good schedule. That was a good,
Exactly.
in our case, good irrigation schedule. And that for those 2 weeks, that was not the greatest irrigation schedule. And so the next year it might get better. And in the third year, it would be sufficient where you're actually saying no fewer times and just accepting, hey, that schedule that was given to me more matches my own intuition. And so I'm going to accept that with less oversight as time goes on. Is that sort of what you foresee happening?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you raised in that. Yeah, exactly. There needs to be an element of trust baked into there. And, in a similar sense, right, AI also needs to be trained by growers in a certain way. So being able to tell, in AI, just the way that you would tell a new worker, for example, or a new, viticulturist, what is the right way to do something on a vineyard and maybe something that, could be done better as well, and providing recommendations on what to do, right? And then over time, they gain their own experience, they gain their own understanding of how to do these different tasks on the farm. And I think that's a good way to look at, how, growers will be interfacing with tools like AI as well. I think a part of it too, which you kind of alluded to there, is that, no one wants a black box, on the farm telling them what to do, right? So if you can't understand and interpret, what your AI model is doing, for example, then you're less likely to trust it, right? So I think a key thing that AI needs to, do, and it's, starting to gradually get better at it, is to really show its thinking, right? Like, show me how you came to this conclusion that, I should harvest on this day, right? Or, tell me how you came to the conclusion that I should irrigate for, 8 hours, on a Saturday, for example, when the weather, is in a certain state, right? So I think those are the kinds of things that growers need to be able to see in these kinds of tools in order to better trust the capabilities of this technology.
Okay, so it's going to be easier to get that data there's going to need to be a lot more transparency in order to start making those decisions. And that's how, there's going to be no day zero where AI comes in and takes over and says, hey, we're running the farm now. It's going to be gradual, and they're going to be able to trust those decisions. What's the sort of like second stage? So we've sort of like talked about this internally, and we've sort of, said, okay, there's really a few waves to how AI is going to come in. And we just talked about that first wave where it's sort of saying, there's going to be more efficiency on the farm. You're going to go check fewer things. You're going to get large amounts of data. You're still going to be making the decisions. Can you take us through sort of like what happens after that? Because some of this, this first wave is already happening. Like we make irrigation automation equipment that can take actions based on soil moisture sensing. And so what happens after this first level of efficiency where we start to see some decisions presented to us that we can get, action taken? What happens next?
Yeah, I think, efficiency is always that first step of ROI, and that's why it's so important. I think, oftentimes in agriculture technology, you'll see companies really start from, pitching quality and or yield, for example, to the grower. And that, of course, everyone wants more yield. Like if I'm producing 3 tons, of course I want to produce 1 more ton, right? But there's so many factors that go into that, and there's so many it's so hard to tell, what's coming from technology and what's coming from maybe other practices that are being used on the farm, or, maybe, whether maybe the weather was better this year, right? We had more growing degree days. So all of those things impact, these sort of, these ultimate goals of better yield and better quality. But it's also, yeah, of course, really difficult to go straight from, 0 to, better yield and quality. And that's why a lot of companies now start from efficiency, which is, okay, well, let's help you demonstrate ROI, from the get-go, right? Because that's ultimately what's, important to the growers so that they can get better economics from using a new tool. And then, as you're alluding to, right, the second wave after that is, okay, now that growers are, starting to trust these, new technologies, these new tools in their toolkit, what can those tools do further to really help growers, with their work, right? So on one hand, it's, okay, let's help them to make other tasks on the farm easier, right? Maybe it's heat protection, right? Or maybe it's, understanding, again, yeah, when to harvest, or, doing yield prediction. But now we're starting to look at, okay, well, if we can tune all these different knobs on the farm, can we help growers to, produce, to tune, these different levers that they have to get better quality grapes, or maybe higher yield as well, right? So that could mean, like, if you're looking at irrigation, being able to stress your grapes a lot more precisely than before, maybe being able to manage the variability of the vineyard as well, so that you can make, the quality much more uniform across your entire block, rather than having to grow multiple tiers and then harvest them separately, which is also another, inefficiency problem as well. So I think that is the next step there, which is really looking towards, how can we impact, the outcome of the crop altogether. And I think as, that starts to happen over time, and, there's early, technologies trying to do that already. I think what we're going to see is that there's going to be much more, broad scale adoption of these kinds of tools over the next 10 years, where, growers can not only get more efficiency, but also to get, better, outcomes from the crop, better marketable yield, better quality as well. And, I think what, we'll eventually see here as well is that right now, a lot of that information, a lot of that know-how around using technology to help operations is still siloed across, individual farms, right? And I think something really interesting there is, as it becomes more commonplace, I think we're going to see, more tools that can actually share information, non-proprietary information across, different growers, where, maybe, all the growers are starting to find that, using automation a certain way, or using, a sensor a certain way on the farm is going to be really useful, in general, right? So we've seen that, for example, with tools like, Thule, the evapotranspiration sensors. We've seen that as well with, drip irrigation even as well, where, 50 years ago, everyone, was a lot of people, in fact, used flood irrigation in, other parts of the industry. And then now, in California, the large proportion of growers use drip irrigation because it is just more efficient and it does improve your quality as well. So I think we're going to see that transformation over time where there's this sort of shared knowledge base. That first, growers need to gain trust in technology, or that's what technology has to be able to, do to gain the trust of growers. And then, we're going to move into, higher stakes decision making, like quality, yield, and other areas before it really becomes commonplace best practices.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you're talking about this, sort of going from just a bare bones efficiency boost into, making those decisions about quality, I'm reminded about Jeff Delnin, who's, really, I mean, this is one of our user stories, but he's, really told us so much about how he's using data and various sensors and of course our irrigation automation equipment to kind of create the ultimate Bordeaux block but I feel like he's really at the forefront of using information and all of the tools available to him because he's got the luxury of this, multiple fields that, to grow wine on. He has the resources to build that block and look at the soil and, do irrigation down at the plant level. But that sounds like something that, once you get past the efficiency and you're not going to the field as much, you can actually, and you can look at large data sets, you can actually start to look at, oh, well, actually, I want to build this very specific product. I want to look deeper into how I can build a quality product. And you're kind of saying, after a few years of feedback and data, that might start to become the forefront of sort of like the next wave of how AI will affect us. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And I think if you look at it more systemically as well, like right now, what we're talking about is very focused on the vineyard itself. And there's certainly a lot of ways that AI can help growers in that sense. But I think what's interesting too is, as we get more broad scale adoption of AI as well, we're going to see that its value extends beyond just the vineyard as well, right? Extending into, for example, the winery, right? Where winemakers can also, leverage some of the data that AI is helping to interpret and parse, as well as leveraging, different levers that you have in the vineyard to control for quality and to control for yield. To basically help with the production of the wine itself, right? And that's something that's really interesting. We already see tools out there, more traditional software tools out there that already can help connect the vineyard and the winery. And as AI becomes more commonplace, I think we're going to see that those tools become supercharged with AI as well, and that growers and winemakers alike are going to be able to collaborate much more closely through that too. So there's a sort of systemic change that I think that this can really bring about.
Oh, it's really interesting. We've talked about a lot here. Do you have I'm just going to go, Arthur, onto slide 6. I feel like, in our questions, we've sort of talked about, how people are going to trust and go through the decision-making process. At first, it's going to be manual, and then they're going to let the tools handle some of the basic tasks. Once there's a few years of verified data, then it's going to go a little bit more autonomous. Like, we're going to allow the trusted decisions to take more action on our behalf. We're going to have a little bit less oversight over the system before it really becomes a system that is working for us almost invisibly. Can you give us a little bit of an example beyond maybe irrigation automation? Maybe how AI makes data, especially weather data, useful for vineyards?
Yeah, I think when you look at weather data, for example, it's a very similar case to when you're processing imagery from the vineyard as well. I think on one hand, you can always, you'll get tons of weather data and you can look at weather every day, but it's also not possible to look at weather every time of the day as well, right? And that's something where I think, first of all, from the perspective of interpretability, being able to understand data, that's something AI, of course, can help with. It can help you to automatically look at all this data over time and, help you understand, trends in that data, help you understand the impact of it on the crop as well. And then there's the flip side as well, where, weather forecasting is getting a lot better because of AI as well, right? There's a lot of traditional tools out there today and methodologies that allow people to, put up a weather forecast, but that's starting to be changed with AI as well, which can run simulations, for example, of what the weather's going to be like And I think what's interesting there is we're going to see predictive capabilities beyond just telling you a weather forecast, but really getting to the crux of it, which is, okay, if the weather becomes this, right? If the temperature goes above 95 degrees, for example, on a hot day, what's going to happen, to our vines on that day as well, right? And helping you understand when that happens and being able to recommend interventions to you ahead of time as well, right? If a heat wave is coming, you want to make sure you're putting water where, taking some other intervention on your vines, maybe shade cloth, for example, well before, that heat wave actually hits, right? Because once it hits, then you're already scrambling. It's an emergency, right? To be able to protect your plants, right? So I think there's a lot of promise in AI being able to help growers to, remind them of, surface certain issues to them well before they actually happen, right? And I think that's a really interesting thing there. Likewise with even, equipment as well, right? Like, vehicles do break down over time, right? Machines do break down over time. And, there's certain kinds of signals that sometimes can be extracted from vehicles to show that, hey, something's not quite right, right? Something is vibrating the wrong way. And, of course, as a human, you're not going to go put your hand in a tractor or an ATV to feel if it's, working right or not, right? But that's something where, coupled with a sensor, AI is able to help, growers to, do predictive maintenance or even proactive maintenance, where if something goes wrong, they can automatically detect it before it actually fully breaks.
It's interesting. This hits on one of the other questions I was just about to ask about what's being built right now. Like, what are the existing use cases where if someone's interested in AI or starting to get curious about it, what are the things that they can get right now that will start helping them, either collect more data so that they can be ready, so they can use it, or just making their life more efficient and easy. Can you go through a few of those use cases? I know you just mentioned maintenance. You talked a little bit about weather. Are there any other use cases?
Yeah, well, there's so many use cases out there, and there's a lot of exciting things going on in the industry. And there's even growers who are developing their own tools as well, which is really interesting. I think obviously a lot of our work is in irrigation, and adaptive irrigation is something that we spend a lot of time developing and working with growers on, which is essentially being able to close the loop on irrigation, close the loop on all this data that growers are getting and being able to help growers really fine tune that for, whatever crop outcomes you're looking for, as well as helping them to save labor. There's also, of course, being able to collect a lot of this, spatial data, imagery from the vineyard, whether that's putting on a vehicle or, taking pictures from satellite and then, processing that to better understand what's happening spatially across the vineyard. I think something interesting as well that hasn't seen a whole lot of development yet, that something that we are working on here at Verdi is really helping to add an additional sort of interface to what growers are used to, which is often, if it's not doing things manually, then it's fiddling around with a mobile app. But moving to a way of working where instead of using an app to do things, being able to just prompt your farm, for example, to be able to do things in a field, which is a far more natural way to work than having to play around with an app. Like, we've felt that pain ourselves. When you're in the field and it's 100 degrees out and you're like, okay, like my phone's overheating, I can't use an app, for example, right? That's something where being able to transition to more natural ways of working certainly is going to help with overall technology adoption as well. And I think there's AI that you're already seeing out there as well that isn't so obvious, right? There's things like yield prediction, for example, that's getting increasingly better. There's things that are helping growers as well with supply chain as well, better forecasting and predicting when they need to have things in the field. So there's a lot of exciting work happening across the industry, and I think everyone's really focused on how to make sure the grower gets the most value out of it.
Okay. Could you tell me just a little bit more about some of those things? Like, you talked about yield prediction models or tools like that are available now. Like, how does that work? And a follow-up question is, when you say working more naturally, do you mean like right now I would call someone on my phone and say, hey, go do this for me, or go give me this information? Is that what you mean when you say work more naturally?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, without, sharing too much on that, I guess that's exactly the point, right? Like I think as humans, we're accustomed to, talking to other people, to be able to, simply, call someone up, for example, and, ask for a certain block, to be turned on at a certain time, right? Whereas, I think the conception right now of using tools like automation is that, okay, or like, collecting sensor data is, okay, I need to go to my app now, and then I need to like press these different things in order for something to happen, right? And it's not just about
Yeah.
controlling things in the field, it's also about the data that's coming out from it too, right? Right now, a lot of the time, if you want to look at your, your ET or your evapotranspiration, or sorry, your soil moisture data, you go to a graph and you have to read that graph yourself, right? And you need to have that sort of background knowledge, right? Now, supposedly AI can help us to interpret that and then, tell you what's happening. But even better is if you could simply just ask what's happening, right? The same way that you might ask, an expert in soil science to tell you what's happening in the field or in terms of your soil moisture. That's really, I think, the exciting part of what AI can do to make this much easier to use. Yeah. Yeah. Now, in terms of those other tools out there, there's certainly a lot, but yield prediction, logistics optimization, all of those types of tools. First of all, not my domain of expertise, so I'm going to tell you exactly how they
Okay.
work. But we have seen growers use those, with success in different areas. I think it's a tool that originally has come out of research, showing a lot of promise, and now over the years we've seen that it's starting to gain more accuracy within the field, and we've heard of certain cases where they've been able to predict with 95% plus accuracy.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. That changes the whole business of growing. If you can look at a piece of land and say, hey, we have 95%, accuracy that we're going to produce this much with the resources we have.
Yeah, that's right. It really helps with harvest planning. It really helps with a grower's sort of like yearly work around that.
All right, home stretch. Uh, Arthur, what do you think the day in the life of a grower looks like 10 years from now? Like you're transported into the future. What does a day look like?
Yeah, well, there's such an interesting question. Yeah, I think first of all, I think growers are going to start today, having a report on, the health of their vineyards, the health of their vines, on whatever platform they prefer, whether that's, a text message or whether that's an email, for example, the tool of their choice. But being able to just already have, a status update on what's happening out there so they can go into their day already having an idea of what's happening, and being able to understand already, like issues that they need to be concerned about or different areas that need to be highlighted to them. And I think that's something where they can then get the signal from the noise essentially, where I've got all this information, but what should I actually care about? What should I make sure that I focus my time around today, right? I think that's going to be really important. And then from there, being able to automatically tie that to different operations happening in the field, right? Being able to have your workers go through the field and also be able to have them supported by tools as well, so they can be a lot more efficient with where they go in the field, for example. They and then when they're at a certain point in the field, for example, perhaps being supported by even robots in the field, to help them do specific things as well, right? But at the end of the day, it's still a lot of this, collaboration of, humans and specific, machines that can help them, just like how, we use ATV today, just like how we use harvesters as well for doing mechanized harvesting. I think when you look at areas like irrigation, for example, as well, I think that's something interesting where, I think we're going to get to a point where irrigation can basically emulate some of the ways that growers are making decisions around irrigation, but doing it in a way that's a lot more transparent. So you may walk into the field one day and see that, hey, the irrigation system has, turned on itself. I whip out my phone and I ask, hey, tell me about this irrigation and, block 2B, for example. And it's going to tell you about how it made the decision and all of that, whether you want to make any changes to that or say that, hey, actually, like, this is good or, this is not the right time to do it. because I'm going to have people coming to the field later, for example, to do some fixes, right? So being able to have that ability to offload some of your daily work, but also being able to then be freed up to do other things that are, perhaps more important to you as well. But I think overall, those are just some specific examples, but I think we're going to see operations shift from being, somewhat reactive, which is, okay, something has happened in the field. Now I have to run out and do it, to being, more proactive, where you can have more lead time ahead of things actually happening to, understand what to do and, whether you want to proceed with a particular action. And I think we're going to see something where there's a lot of, focus right now on just the day-to-day operations of making sure things are working properly on the farm, to now, growers having, more time now to also think about, okay, are we on track to hitting the quality, that we need, and being able to have that type of discussion and thought processes more often, because you're not bogged down by the day-to-day of trying to read your data or trying to, run to a particular spot in the field to check something.
Yeah, I think you hit on it. For me, one of the discussions we had sort of as a team when discussing AI about those, outcomes down the road is that, and made me the most exciting, is that shift from, really being reactive, what's happening today and what do I have to do to prevent, risks? What can I see and what can I do to make my future less stressful? Mm-hmm. And, that ability to have more data to, understand that the irrigation pump, for example, that's the world we're in, is acting a little bit funny. And, even giving responsibility for maintenance of, your piece of land over to, say, the local irrigation company, where they're receiving that intelligence and they're saying, hey, you know what? We've got 5 pumps in the area. They're all this kind of make and model, and they're going to need replacement at some point. But if they go down, that piece of land has a big problem if we don't have them in stock. And so really taking it from, someone at a supply chain level has some proactive information about where stock needs to be to serve the landowners. And prevent them from having any, problems that risk their livelihood, or the quality or any of these other outputs. I think that for me is one of the most exciting parts about where AI would change, someone's lives in the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. Just in closing, if you were, I guess we are talking to growers today, if they were to take any next steps, what should growers be doing now to prepare for this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the interesting thing is I think growers are very open-minded. So, growers, I'm sure even in this audience, are already trying out different tools on their vineyards, for example, right? Looking and thinking about how AI might be able to help. And so I won't provide any recommendations on, what they could do there, because they're already doing it. But I think it would be great to ask, I think it would be great for growers to ask certain questions, to really make sure that these tools are, providing them the value that they're looking for. I think a really key one is making sure that the companies that we're working with are have a clear ROI story to tell, right? That using AI is not just a way to, make things look better, that it's not just a fancy tool, but that it's actually going to impact the bottom line at the end of the day as a vineyard. And so I think having that, real conversation, with new technologies that are technology developers that are coming in is really helpful, not just to make sure that the vineyard is getting value, but also to make sure that the whole, toolkit that is being developed for vineyards is getting better as well, right? I think we've seen a lot of shiny tools in the market that, really need to be connected to a clear value story. And so that line of questioning is definitely going to help that. I think another, big area here is really, having, as growers asking ourselves, how, if this tool actually works, right? What is it going to look like to actually scale this to a larger operation, right? Possibly all of my operation. And the reason I say that is because it's not a trivial answer, right? There's a lot of tools out there where it's easy to put it on a single block or a few blocks, for example. But then if you want to scale it to, hundreds or even thousands of acres, that becomes an actual, a challenge on its own, right? So there's change management where we have to train, for example, our workers or viticulturists and, our entire, our practices are in order to adopt a new type of technology, essentially a new practice as well. There's also sometimes implementation from a technical standpoint that needs to be considered as well. So all of those things are really, I think, key to actually getting value out of technology rather than just piloting it at a small scale. So I think those are the kinds of questions that growers can really think about and also ask new companies and technologies that are coming into.
Yeah, ask how they're prepared so that they can take advantage of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So, Arthur, I just wanted to say thanks for joining me on this, talking about irrigation AI and how it's going to change, how people grow grapes and how it affects their vineyards. I also wanted to thank George and the team at Win for hosting this. Arthur, did you have any closing words or anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. It was really great to chat today. I think, even just talking through and hearing your questions, it really made me think about, how technology can be used on a vineyard and, really, give you some new ideas around, what to be excited about and, really what to build for as well. So really excited for that. So yeah, thanks again. And, thank you to the Win team for having us here today. And, of course, thank you to everyone in the audience for being here today as well. If you have any questions about AI or technology in general, of course, feel free to reach out to myself, over email or a website here at Verdi. And of course, at Verdi, once again, we're making irrigation automation easy and affordable for growers. It's about 10 times less expensive than traditional solutions. So if you're looking for a solution for your vineyard, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to chat with you and understand what you're looking for as well. So thank you once again.
That's great. Thanks, Arthur.
Well, thanks everyone once again for joining us today. Obviously, I want to thank Arthur and Graham for their time in putting together a really terrific session. And last but certainly not least, I want to once again thank our sponsors, our presenting series sponsor, Verdi, for their support, along with our series supporting sponsors, BeagleTech and Belor Carl Immigration Group. Once again, it's their support that allows us to continue to produce content like this and deliver it for free. Be sure to like our YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.